All right, so hi everybody. Thanks so much again for your patience in waiting while we got things set up. We are so excited to have you here with us today in this session for civil society, academia, and non-government organizations. So I'm Marina Best. I am a senior social development specialist in ADB's NGO and Civil Society Center. We are very, very excited about this session today because we have a long history of working with civil society, and the desire to work with civil society organizations is very much baked into the DNA of ADB as an institution. We've been working with civil society for many decades, really since our foundation, and really value our collaborations with you, in large part due to the local knowledge, field presence, and expertise that you bring to the table. So we have a great panel with us here today to talk about business opportunities for civil society organizations. So to my left is Ms. Haidy Ear-Dupuy, the head of ADB's NGO and Civil Society Center. Haidy comes to ADB with over 25 years of international development experience, including with civil society with World Vision in Cambodia. To her left is Mr. Steve Gillard, and Steve is the head of ADB's consulting services, and he has over 18 years of experience at both ADB and our sister multilateral EBRD. And to Steve's left is Mr. Vince Docta. Vince is a senior manager with the Worldwide Fund for Nature, with over 20 years of experience working with INGOs, the multilaterals, consulting firms, and academia. And Vince will be discussing the CSO perspective of working with ADB. So without much further ado, Haidy, I'd like to turn it over to you to discuss ADB and civil society.
Thank you, Marina. So my presentation today, should I stand, is actually looking at a quick survey of a preview of who we are as NGO and Civil Society Center and the extended network of staff at ADB to support engagement with civil society. So we'll start with the first slide. So just a quick overview of how the multilateral institutions were set up. Some of you may already know this history of after the Second World War, the Bretton Woods system was set up in which multilateral banks like the World Bank and the IMF was set up to engage with governments on in the financial space so that countries can have last resort borrowing, lending, and there's financial workings between countries so that there's no issues like we had in the First World War, Second World War with financial debts and debts issues and leading to conflicts between countries. So with that said, ADB came later in the 1950s. ADB was established for the Asia-Pacific region for governments to borrow, and governments who cannot access financial markets can access through ADB. And then it's serving the regional partners. And of course, ADB, next slides. There's other banks set up in other regions as well, like Islamic Development Bank, African Development Bank, and so we're members of the series of multilateral banks that work with governments and private sector clients to finance development projects in respective countries. And so ADB has 68 member countries. We have European countries, US, Japan, and then our member countries are listed here where ADB finance projects in what we call DMCs, which is developing member countries. And you may or may not come from those countries. You may come from maybe European countries, but member countries as well in the region. So the next slide is the way we lend. So we have all those countries you saw in the map before, they are represented in our board. So we have board members representing the various countries, and also sometimes they group into different clusters. And usually the financial ministries actually sits on our board of governors and actually decide on ADB workings, and at the management level we have our president, then our president works with the board, reports to the board, and the boards are the owners of the banks. So these banks work similarly, and governance structure is rather similar. So ADB lending model, we have ADB getting money from the capital markets, and then we allocate fundings and loans to member countries, private sectors. And of course, at ADB, we have the sector group, 7 different sectors that we can lend in those different sectors. And it's done through what we call country partnership strategies. So if you're new to this, you can look up online the country that you're interested in, look at the country partnership strategies. Then you get an idea of the sector that ADB is investing in that country. And then with the sector, you get an idea. We used to have something called COBP, which means country business operation. So it's a pipeline of projects. But I think right now it's harder to find those because those are projects that are projected ahead of time, what's coming down the pipelines. But I think now you're most likely to find the country partnership strategy than the country business plan. It may or may not accompany the country partnership strategy. But that gives you an idea of the sectors that ADB invests in and government borrows in those sectors. And then, of course, aside from those, we also have policy-based lending, which is lending for government to support budgets and for governance reforms and different other kinds of reforms in the countries. So the next slide please, shows you a series of what ADB call our products. So banks have lots of different kinds of products. That means different kinds of ways that countries can borrow and ADB can lend. So on the left-hand side are all the different ways that ADB clients borrows from ADB using those modalities to borrow funds. And then on the right-hand side is the private sector. And I put the web link on there and the document we have online that you can read about the different kinds of lending. And what's of interest to civil society usually is the technical assistance. Usually technical assistance is grant money that is most likely managed by ADB. And so the contracting and the goes to ADB. On the other lendings like project loans and such, it may be through government website and government procurement. So I think my colleague will share more in details about that. But just to let you know that these are the different ways that projects can be financed by ADB. So next slide, please. So now it's about how we engage with civil society. We have civil society can engage with ADB through technical assistance consultancy, work with us as advisors or providing inputs into the projects that may be developed through technical assistance. And then we have contract service with civil society as well, making bids for projects. And then, of course, we have sometimes there can be specific funds that civil society can access and work with, but that's not, I think some institution has it, but ADB doesn't have that. Events and partnership is one of the biggest, broadest way that we can engage with civil society. Often we collaborate on knowledge events, like the one you see today with WWF being here as our partner, sharing with you on the knowledge that they've gained as an institution in working with us. And then, of course, we have other like sector events, like the Social Protection Week a week ago, the Skills Forum that's coming up next week, and then we have additional things like the Energy Forum, the Transport Forum. So some of you may or may not have engaged in those in the past, but those are knowledge events that we do throughout the years that you can participate in, be panel members, be speakers. And of course, we have our annual meeting, Civil Society Engagement, which civil society comes to our annual meeting, participate and share the learnings. And I think the next slide, please, is just showing our NGO and civil society team. With that said, there's Marina, myself, Roselle, Ami, and Kate, and Ami's there. She's our procurement analyst and who actually helps us a lot with the contracting. We also have a network of civil society anchor focals in all the resident missions. So if you're interested in Indonesia, we have an Indonesia focal. If you're interested in Thailand, we have a Thailand focal. So we have networks of staff in resident mission and also in headquarters who actually can engage with civil society and provide guidance and help you maneuver ADB if needed. So the next slide, please. So this is just a quick summary of what we do at NGO and Civil Society Center. We do a lot of events. One of the things that we've been engaging after COVID is actually doing more of business opportunities. We did an online one earlier this year, and then this one we collaborate with our procurement colleagues. And the earlier one, also our procurement colleagues are there to share the process and procedures. And I think we were looking at another one later this year. We like to do it online as well so that more people can participate online. And I think with that, it concludes my presentation on just give you an introduction of our group and what we do to support civil society. Thank you.
All right, so thank you so much, Heidi. So now we're going to turn it over to Steve to talk a little bit more about opportunities for CSOs in consulting and contracting. So Steve, over to you.
Thanks, Marina. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon again. So I'm going to talk today about consultancy opportunities for civil society organisations. I'm going to start with some statistics from which we'll build in this presentation. So ADB has over 3,000 civil society organisations registered on its consultant management system. And that means that this number of consultants have either been contracted or applied or registered interest in ADB assignments. So there's a very large footprint of CSOs already, CSOs that are interested in ADB and that are on our radar. Last year, we did 24 consultancy contracts with CSO organizations, and there was a combined value of approaching $7 million US. There's a couple of other sort of interesting, less apparent facts at the bottom. One is that over the past 4 years, 64% of contracts awarded to CSOs were directly awarded. So obviously this is a very important source of CSO engagement, and I'm going to explain to you a bit more about what direct contracting is later, and maybe explain how you can position yourself for it. And the other one is that CSOs were also subcontracted by other entities on 18 occasions. So again, this is obviously another very important potential source of work, and I'll explain a bit more about how you can position yourself for subcontracting later. So why does ADB use CSOs? Well, we have a very long-range strategy document that you've possibly heard mention of already over the last couple of days, which is Strategy 2030. And this informs the bank's stakeholders of the operational priorities for the rest of this decade. And I'm just going to read you an extract from it. It says, ADB will work with CSOs to tap their unique strengths, such as their local presence and specialized knowledge. It will explore opportunities for increasing their involvement in the design and implementation of projects supported by ADB. Particular focus will be on operations that use grassroots participatory approaches to target the poor and vulnerable groups, mobilize women and young people, and monitor project activities and outputs. So the specialized knowledge that's mentioned there is quite obvious. A lot of CSOs are actually well positioned to offer this knowledge. They have obviously social issues ingrained in their mandates. They also have the grassroots elements. They have local exposure, local skills. They perhaps have languages, perhaps even regional languages. They have awareness of culture in the places in which they operate, which is something that ADB lacks and requires. CSOs also possibly offer an element of credibility and independence on ADB projects. Perhaps there's a perception that multilateral development banks are sort of money-driven financial institutions. However, if you have CSOs involved, they give this alternative perspective and represent the interest groups which are increasingly important on our projects. Also, CSOs are potentially good value. They're non-profit organisations, a lot of them, and this can mean that they can actually undercut private sector firms in some areas. And I'll talk a bit more about this later as well. So that's why CSOs. The next slide is perhaps on why not CSOs. There are certain perceptions around the use of CSOs. Hopefully events like this go some way to sort of reducing the issues which perhaps ADB staff seem to think that they face with CSOs. So here are some of the perceptions. CSOs may have some issues following ADB's procedures and rules. So, for instance, the procurement rules can be quite complicated, the bidding rules can be tough, also the rules around submitting invoices can be hard to follow, and you know, we often get questions from CSOs where they've struggled with this. Possibly this is because they have a bit of a less corporate culture than typical private sector organisations. They may not have large accounting departments. They may not have teams dedicated to preparing bids. Obviously, this isn't always the case. There are some very large CSOs out there who have these things. So there's a perception that sort of extra supervision may be required. So the context in which ADB sees CSOs is as follows. This is an extract from the staff instructions, and it says, a consultancy firm is any private or public entity with the capacity to provide consulting services. Such entities include international and national consulting firms, universities, research institutions, government agencies, civil society organisations, and non-governmental organisations, when such entities provide consulting services. So CSOs have many important roles with ADB. They're a powerful influence on policy. We've already talked about them being an important stakeholder that was consulted in Strategy 2030. But if you're looking for ADB finance, the key message really is that you're a consultant to ADB. So ADB isn't a donor to be pitched to. We don't give CSOs grants. CSOs are not expected to co-finance projects, so we won't be expecting you to contribute. CSOs have to compete with the private sector. I mean, this is probably the toughest part, really, because a lot of CSOs don't feel that they're well positioned to do this. But ADB's basic business model for consultancy is that we put out a need to the market and allow the market to put forward the best bid. So that's really the way that it works. CSOs can compete on price. This is actually a fairly recent development, because I think 4 or 5 years ago there was a rule that if an NGO was on a shortlist, that evaluation could not include price. It was perceived that this was unfair to the private sector because CSOs had a lower cost base. However, this rule was removed. In a sense, it was perceived that it was actually unfair on CSOs. So you can actually get advantage in competitive processes now by underbidding the private sector. Continuing the theme of CSOs as consultants, I've kind of covered the first point there about having to follow the procurement methods and billing instructions. But the second one is that CSOs are actually entitled to make a profit if they can. Obviously, not all CSOs are allowed to under their mandate, but if they aren't, they're still allowed to cover their various expenses or overheads. So overheads can include a portion of your rent, your utilities, your administration costs, and these can all be part of an uplift on the rates of the experts which you use on assignments. And we're also sympathetic to the cash flow issues which CSOs may suffer. We realise that you may not have a lot of resources to front-end costs on contracts, so we can issue advances. There are a few rules associated with advances that I put there. One is that you have to put in the advance request a couple of weeks before you actually need the money. You can only have one advance active at a time. You have to liquidate a particular advance before requesting another one. We don't give advances right towards the end of contracts, and ultimately advances are repayable should the contract be terminated. So a few tips here. A lot of these are fairly generic tips that you may have kind of heard in other sessions. There were a few tips that were given in the first panel discussion yesterday as well, which sort of echo some of these ideas. So you should be trying to collect relevant business intelligence. My colleague Julian did an earlier session which was dedicated to this topic, so I hope some of you saw that. I will quickly refresh you on a couple of the places you can find that information also. Networking is always important also, so events like today are great, and I hope you've made some contacts since you've been here with other CSOs, with the private sector, and with ADB staff. Try and develop your reputation through performance. If you do get an ADB contract, we do track the performance of consultants, and this is taken into consideration either formally or informally when we decide on who will take future work. So it's very important to do a good job should you get the opportunity. As we've said already, try and study the bidding documents and understand the selection criteria. It can take a while to read through a request for proposal package or something like this, but it's a good use of time because obviously the actual preparation of a proposal can take several weeks, and it's not worth missing out because of a technicality. Also know the contract and particularly pay attention to rules around timesheets, retention of receipts and things like that, particularly if it's a time spent contract. The final point I put in there is consider individuals' contracts. If you're a CSO, you may be looking at what I've been calling firms consultancy contracts. But as you may have picked up from my first session yesterday, over 4,000 individual contracts are issued by ADB each year for individual consultants. And CSOs and other firms are able to apply for these by putting experts forward. So if you have an employee that would be a good candidate for an individual's consultant contract, then by all means you can apply for that. And this is, of course, a very good way of gaining ADB expertise across your staff. So, as I mentioned at the start, 64% of the contracts awarded to CSOs were directly contracted. This is a non-competitive method which ADB uses, but we're only allowed to use it in very specific circumstances. One is for low-value contracts, which means $100,000 and less. And the other is where there's some characteristics of the consultant or the assignment, which mean that we basically have to choose a particular consultant. So it can be that there's only one consultant available, that there's only one consultant who has been qualified, or that a particular consultant has exceptional experience. And these contracts can be a very useful bridge or stepping stone to getting bigger ticket work with ADB. So if you manage to get one of these small contracts, even if it's only $20,000 or something, it may be a route into getting higher value work. And the way that you get direct contracts is by connections or by reputation, really. So it's about whether you've worked with ADB before, and if you're known to have worked for ADB before and to have a certain skill set, you may be chosen, particularly for one of these low-value contracts. And also, of course, by reputation. If you're known to be the leader in your particular field, that can also be a way into these contracts. So hopefully you've met some ADB staff who are the decision makers in these types of things, so that they know that you're around. We also had a mention of these NGO anchors. These are people that are based in the regional departments. They are good people to talk to if you are interested in particular countries, and you can find ways there to get yourself on the radar for direct contracting. So another important idea is subcontracting. Subcontracting is where another firm takes the lead on a bid, but you join as a subcontractor. So you get a slice of the pie in terms of the finance, and you also get ADB experience. And we heard yesterday from some of the panel members that you might have, say, a large engineering firm, which is great on the engineering side of things, but it may not be well resourced to perhaps run local surveys or workshops or trainings. And they may be looking for CSOs or other organizations that can offer those aspects. The other important thing to note with subcontracting is that you can offer to be subcontracted on more than one more than one bid. So if there are multiple firms that are bidding, and perhaps you have a niche experience, you could potentially get on 2 or 3 of the bids if you can. I'll give you a tip later on where you can find some information on that subcontracting idea as well. So Julian's earlier session, he looked at the website. I'm not going to go into that in any detail other than just to remind you of a handful of key pages. So we've got the country partnership strategies and the country operations business plan, which are high-level documents which you should look at because they're a very good way of getting ahead of the curve and knowing what's in the pipeline. If you don't look at these documents, then you may be at a disadvantage compared to other institutions or other consultants that do. The procurement plan outlines all of the procurement that's attached to a particular project, but as Julian showed earlier, these are items that are not necessarily already ready for bidding, but again, it gives you a heads up for what's around the corner. Then we have the consultant services recruitment notice, which is the current active bids where you can submit your expression of interest. But as we've said, if you're just starting to think about the particular role when the CSRN comes out, you may be too late because other firms may have already prepared and established their networks and done their research. Finally, there's the hop-on opportunities. We have the list of shortlisted consultants. This is particularly useful for that subcontracting idea. The shortlisted consultants are firms that have expressed interest on a particular assignment that ADB has chosen. So you may have, say, 6 firms that we're requesting to prepare a proposal. And these firms are actively working on their proposals. So it may be a good idea to approach firms if they have work in the area in which you specialize and see if they're interested on bringing you on board as a subcontractor to improve their bid. We also have a list of contract awards. This again is very useful, mainly for future planning. The contract awards tell you who obviously has been successful with ADB before, and you can see who your rivals are, and you can see also who the successful firms are that you could perhaps seek to collaborate with in future. I'm going to flag again this very useful document, which is Working with ADB, a primer for identifying business opportunities for NGOs. I think this is an excellent brief document. It contains a lot of information on things like how technical assistance works. It gives a lot of tips and links for NGOs. So if you haven't read that, then I suggest that you spend some time and digest it. It's very helpful. Finally, I'm just going to say a few words about the future. We are working currently on a new firm's contract template. We have done a consultation process. We've discussed internally within the bank. We've sought the private sector's views, and we've also sought the opinions of several CSOs. We've listened to what the pain points are and what CSOs find difficult in the contracts, and we're going to try and improve our contract so that it will be easier for CSOs to manage and for everyone. We struggle to have a CSO-specific template because our basic principles of procurement is that everyone should be treated fairly, so it's not very easy for us to have, let's say, one contract with CSOs which is softer than the contract that we would offer to the private sector. So I think where we're going to end up is just trying to be a bit fairer to everyone and make contracts a bit simpler for payment terms and things like this. We're also working on CMS2. This will, again, allow new approaches and hopefully improve various aspects, including the ease of use of the system. So hopefully it will make everyone's lives easier. So I think that's it from me. I'm going to hand back to Marina now. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Steve. Great presentation and super informative. So now on to our final speaker, Vince Docta from WWF, to give a bit about the perspective of working with ADB from a longstanding partner. Vince, over to you. Thank you.
Good afternoon to everyone. My name is Vince, and I'm part of WWF. It's World Wildlife Fund for Nature, and not the World Wrestling Federation, just to be clear about that. So I'm here to talk about the long-standing partnership between the ADB and WWF. We've been in partnership with ADB since 2001. And so this has been like 22 years of partnership. So I'd like to impart some of the learnings and experiences that we've had over the years, particularly for those who are, trying to make a breakthrough with the ADB. ADB is like it should be demystified. We don't understand, or probably there's that perception that ADB, a bank, therefore bank equals dollars, sign. Which is fine, I think. Even internally in WWF, sometimes my colleagues would say, so you're working with the ADB. Could we pitch in a proposal? I tell them, no, that doesn't work that way, actually. So with that, talking about money, I think to start off, we know that the loss of nature makes us a bit poorer. I think I'm probably preaching to the choir already, or preaching to the converted, that the overexploitation of natural resources undermines the foundations of development, and that the social and economic impact of climate change and the degradation of natural systems are incalculable, and if unabated, will be catastrophic. So, but then again, the good news is that the foundations for change are already in place. The evidence of harm, the science is there. It's more clear than ever. More and more people care about nature, and many great minds are now working towards finding solutions. But at WWF, we feel that humanity needs to take the next difficult step, which is to convert the knowledge and this sentiment into stopping and reversing the damage to our living planet. We must do this together and quickly. And so this is the challenge, and more so the opportunity that lies ahead of us. So in WWF, our mission is simple. We want to create a world where people and nature can thrive together. We've been in existence for the past 60 years. We work in 85 countries. We are active in almost 100 countries with around 6,000 individuals working together, innovating and striving for impact. So our brand, the Panda brand, has become a powerful reputation for forging conservation solutions at the global and community level. You might have noticed, the Earth Hour, which is a yearly thing where people try to conserve electricity. More recently, if you've been following the news with the demise of the Twitter bird, WWF capitalized on that to put the message across, the extinction of birds. So, they used Twitter's rebrand to get the message across. So that's how we work. We capitalize on our strengths, the local and global reach of our network, and the influence of our brand and our work in the international arena, as well as in the field, and where large public support across the whole world. So WWF actually delivers its work through these sort of practice areas. There are oceans, forests, freshwater, and wildlife that provide essentials to everyone. And then we also want to tackle the two most urgent threats to nature and humanity, which is climate change and also food production, while also addressing the underlying global drivers for the loss of nature. One is a financial system that must value nature, a governance system that should empower people to lead on nature protection, and markets where sustainable production and consumption must become the norm. As I mentioned, these are some of the 9 areas where we are working on. But reversing the loss of nature can't be delivered by a single organization such as WWF. So we always try to collaborate, where we call it Together Possible. It's at the heart of everything that we do. We try to look for powerful partnerships and coalitions that are able to design solutions that deliver on our global ambition. And that comes to the topic of the ADB and WWF partnership. So working in partnership with governments, international organizations, civil society, and businesses is at the core of WWF activities. Our approach is to work with public sector that has evolved mainly from a fundraising-led to a partnership-led approach. And this essentially aims to influence public sector architecture, institutions, policies, financial allocation to support WWF's mission. As I mentioned, this has been a long-standing partnership. It started out in 2001. We take pride in the fact that the Memorandum of Understanding is ADB's first accord with a non-government organization. I think our lives with the NGOC are intertwined. NGOC came into existence in February 2001, and then the MOU, the partnership MOU, came about in September 2001 of that year. So it established the basis for information sharing, knowledge management, and capacity building. So we have collaborated with ADB on a large-scale environmental regional programs in Asia Pacific throughout the years in the Greater Mekong Subregion, the Coral Triangle Initiative, Heart of Borneo, Living Himalayas, other cross-cutting issues on water and climate change. As Haidy mentioned earlier, we have co-organized activities and side events on the ADB annual meeting, the UNFCCC COP events, and also on the CBD COP events as well. Just to show you, I won't bore you with the gory details about it, but this is like something that we work on with ADB. We have identified areas for collaboration. My only point here is we have 9 practices, as I mentioned earlier, but we strive to look for common agenda where we can work on. Obviously, if it's just WWF, it's conservation, species-centric. But obviously, ADB's bread and butter, so to speak, is on sustainable infrastructure, ADB is working on Healthy Oceans Action Plan. So you have to find common areas of interest where you want to work on. And so I'm just going to share some reflections that I've also called off from a document which has evaluated the effectiveness of ADB's partnerships throughout the year. This was published in 2015. So it states the rationale for partnering for WWF. Of course, we want to help ADB to be more responsive to environmental and biodiversity concerns. And for ADB, it's to tap the WWF's expertise and the field presence in Asia Pacific. Just to show you that we are present in Asia Pacific in 25 countries, 18 of which are DMC, developing member countries of the ADB. So we work in transboundary landscapes, as I mentioned, the GMS, Pacific Islands, and Mongolia, which host some of the planet's most biologically important places. Some of the main features of the ADB and WWF partnership include knowledge sharing, where we have collaborated on specific initiatives that pave the way for a more systematic relationship resulting in joint project preparation or implementation, completion of a series of publications, events, and in some cases, financing of activities. There's also been sharing of knowledge and operational coordination, which are the mainstays of this relationship. And then, as I mentioned, there are some instances where WWF and ADB have submitted joint funding requests to agencies such as the Global Environmental Facility. I'd like to highlight one area of this cooperation, the liaison work, which actually where my role sits. This is one special area where WWF has been seconding at its own expense a relationship manager to work with ADB. This has enabled the WWF to keep abreast of the developments and initiatives within the ADB, providing inputs to appropriate ADB counterpart and vice versa, help organize events, meetings, annual reports, convene technical conversations, and generally promote a closer collaboration between the two institutions. So we feel that in terms of the key factors for success would include, first is the consistency of counterparts and the focal points has been very helpful for both organizations. Institutional memory remains strong and reinforced throughout the continued interaction. Over time, ADB and WWF have become more familiar with their respective institutional arrangements, policies, procedures, and facilitating collaboration. Number two, there's determined interest, particularly on the WWF side, to pursue this partnership with the ADB. After identifying the potential of a relationship way back 2 decades ago, WWF has relentlessly pursued it, and very actively, but also very flexibly. I think the third would be the mutual appreciation of each other's comparative advantage, while continuing to point out, some difference in perspective, particularly during, the early days when climate change and environment wasn't the buzzword for everyone. WWF has pursued a constructive engagement with the ADB, where the approach has generally attempted to find common ground, identify opportunities for collaboration, and convince ADB through rational arguments and factual evidence rather than just through rhetoric. So WWF has engaged ADB at the technical level and has been ready on a number of occasions to shoulder, some cost sharing. And this approach has always been appreciated by ADB, particularly at the depth of the technical contribution. that WWF can make on biodiversity and environmental issues at various levels, and also the extensive country experience. So you may ask, Vince, it's probably easier said than done. You are a big organization. How about ours? We're just starting off. We're trying to pursue a partnership with ADB. I guess these are some of the reflections that I'd like to impart. Partnering with large institutions such as ADB can be a valuable opportunity, even for small NGOs, but it requires careful planning and strategic approaches. I guess one would be really to understand, do your homework, understand ADB's priorities. Our colleagues have earlier provided some tips and guidance on where you can find these information. You know, it's a matter of aligning the interest of your NGO's mission and the projects and the areas of interest for ADB. Next, it was already mentioned earlier, engage in ADB's consultations and networking events, because that would allow you to be informed and kept abreast of the latest trends, issues, and opportunities that are coming along your way. Number 3 would be build a strong case and demonstrate local impact. Obviously, NGOs are in the best position, but I think NGOs should clearly articulate how your work aligns with ADB's goals and how you can contribute to their projects. Develop a compelling case for collaboration, emphasizing the impact and outcomes that your NGO can achieve, and highlight that your NGO's work has positive impact at the local level, because ADB often seeks projects that benefit communities directly. Not just often, always, rather. So I think I'm down to my last slide. Fourth would be to leverage also other partnerships. Consider partnering with other organizations that have experience working with ADB. Particularly if you're pursuing contracts, the service provision, it's very helpful if you partner with someone who has already the track record, whether it's firms or NGO CSOs as well. So collaborative efforts can be more appealing to ADB and increases your capacity to deliver impactful projects. And success, even if you start small, because successful smaller collaborations can pave the way for larger initiatives in the future. Next would be, I think Steve has mentioned it earlier, really the need to build internal capacities, the need for that corporate culture to be built up. And it is through practice. When you get involved in ADB, somehow you get the knack of it later on. And then last would be really persistence and patience. Building partnerships with large institutions take time. As I mentioned, 20 years, more than 20 years in the making. Hopefully it will still continue over time. But be patient, be persistent, and be open to feedback throughout the process. Tailor-fit your approach to fit ADB's specific requirements, and be prepared to adapt your strategies as you navigate through the partnership building process. Remember that successful partnerships with large institutions will require long-term commitment and a track record of delivering results. So with that, I wish you well with your journey in trying to build a strategic partnership with ADB. And I hope that you also say the battle cry of WWF, together possible. Thank you very much, and have a great day.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Vince. I love the final message of persistence and patience. ADB is a very large organization, but with time, persistence, and patience, it is possible for everyone to figure it out. So we are out of time for the session, although I think this is the last session of the day. So if the organizers would humor us, I would like to give maybe time for 2 to 3 questions from the audience. Is that okay? Okay, thanks, Gerald. All right, so if any questions from the audience, maybe we can just kind of quickly address those. You guys are a tough crowd. All of the questions were answered. That's amazing. Okay. All right, so I'm going to say going once, going twice. All right, well, with that, I would like to say a huge thank you to our panelists for today, Haidy, Steve, and Vince. It was really great to have you. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to our CSO colleagues today. And for those of you in the audience, again, Haidy and I are both in the NGO and Civil Society Center. The other members of our team are here. Can you give a wave, Roselle and Ami? Yep, and Tony? Yep. So please do feel to approach us. We are here as a point of contact for you. So come talk to us, reach out to us, and we can hopefully answer any questions that were not asked today. All right, so thank you, everybody. Have a great evening.